I truly think, and some people think I'm kind of making a joke about this, but I think that era of selling vinyl, double platinum, and this one's gone 5. I think that will, in the overall arc of entertainment, will be viewed like the Catskills or vaudeville or something. I think it'll just be this tiny little snapshot. Happens to be our entire life in our world. Yeah. But when you look at it in the basis of a century or something,
You're listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a T. Torrance Productions original podcast.
I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain. 'Cause in the desert, you can't remember your name, and there ain't no one for to give you no pain. Coming up, co-founder of America, Mr. Gerry Beckley. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is Kurt Newman, and we are staring at the world today. Sometimes people write a song, or you hear a song on the radio, and it stays with you for maybe a month. You're like, oh, that was a good song. I really like it. Sometimes even a little bit longer. But every once in a while, there's these songs that just are there forever. It feels like they've been a part of your life, and you hear them come on the radio. You're like, oh, I love this song. I haven't heard this in a while. And you sing along with it. You know all the words. My next guest today is one of those people who wrote those songs for us in the world. He's a co-founder of the band America, and he's written songs that have spent a lifetime with us. And Mr. Gerry Beckley, welcome to the show, Staring at the World.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Where are you talking to us from today?
I'm in our home in Venice, California.
Nice.
But my wife and I split our time. Our main home is in Sydney, Australia. But while we're doing shows, I'm here in California.
That's great. I know you have the new record out, and I want to talk about that as well as your touring. But I was wondering, for people who don't know you that well, can you tell me a little bit about your coming up in the world? Because I read you had a kind of what I would call a different childhood. You went between 2 continents a little bit, and with your parents. And can you just explain a little bit of your history of growing up and what it was like?
Well, both Dewey and I and our original founding member, Dan, were Air Force, what they call dependents. Our dads were in the Air Force. And so, like with any service, and it's not unique to the Air Force, same with the Army, Navy, you move every few years. Yeah. So it's on one hand an amazing education. You see the world and your horizons are clearly broadened from day one. But it is a unique challenge in ways that you don't realize when you're a kid. You don't have a hometown. You don't really have lifetime friends. You get to know people. So, for example, I was born in Texas, and I moved to London when I was a year old. So I have no memory of Texas. Both Dewey and I just happened to have English moms. Just a coincidence, but I think it added a bit more to the kind of mid-Atlantic story of our lives, in that we were both from American fathers, English mothers. And I've always considered myself kind of half English,
Yeah.
But in the service, you do move, whether you like it or not. If you're having the greatest time, it doesn't matter. You're going to be moving. And if you hate it, don't worry, because you're going to be moving. So that was kind of the childhood.
So I had read that you kind of spent, was it summers in England and then half the year over in the U.S.? Like you'd go back and forth all the time as well. And
school was September to June in the States, and then I would spend most of all the summers in England with the English half of my family.
Right, which I guess they were saying, maybe you said that that influenced you even musically growing up. I had read that you were really playing music early on in your life, or at least musical instruments. You started playing really young.
Yeah.
Was your mother or father musical? Did somebody kind of inspire that in you?
Neither played, but both loved music. And my mom, my earliest memories, she was kind of hooked on all of the romantics, all the Russians, Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff and Prokofiev and stuff, and really lovely stuff to have the first things that you hear. But also, now that I know quite a bit more about it, it was what I would call kind of the birth of melody, those particular composers.
Yeah.
I think where it was an era in composition that was settling into just beautiful melodies and stuff. So lovely, rich thing to grow up with. And also, it being in London, we would go see shows, so you go see Oliver on the stage or Sound of Music and stuff. Wow. So all of that great Lerner and Lowe and Rodgers and Hammerstein, all of that stuff was embedded pretty early.
Yeah, it's a great way to learn melody from the classics, right? My parents, nobody played music either. There was no music around me, but somehow that we had a few records in the house. So you'd grab that kind of stuff from wherever you could as a kid growing up, and it affected you. And it would add to, what you did musically growing up. For me, I think music kind of became an escape, somewhere to go in life. And I'm not sure if it was the same for you, but I would disappear into those records and it's whatever they had. I remember my parents had like a Joan Baez record, and they had a Herb Alpert record and maybe a Neil Diamond record and stuff like that. So I would grab little bits off those records.
Yeah.
And you'd just suck it all up, and they would show up later on in your music. I read that you were in a little surf band in California though as well. Is that early on? Is that true?
Well, but both Dewey and I, because our journeys were similar, even though we didn't meet till much later, but we were both in surf bands. There was that era of a year or two when you were old enough to kind of get that the guitar was cool before the Beatles hit,
Yeah.
So whereas the Beach Boys were a year or so earlier, before that, or right around that time, was the Ventures and all of the great instrumental stuff. So my earliest, I wasn't in California. Dewey was in California, but we both played in surf bands, instrumental stuff, no singers.
And then they make it sound, when I was reading about you, as if you guys, they said, I think you were both in England and playing around little clubs here and there, and they mentioned you were playing Crosby, Stills and Nash songs and stuff like that, and then you were signed to a record contract, and they make it sound as if it was just like poof, it just all happened right away really quickly. Is that in fact what happened with you, or was it a longer process than that?
Well, in our world, I don't want to say it was instantaneous, but if you compare it with other journeys, it really was. We were less than a year out of high school. We had kind of arranged this first batch of songs that we had written 3-part with acoustic. We didn't really have any tapes. We went and sat in record company offices and played for the execs, because London at least has a satellite of all the major labels. It's not the home of the label.
Right.
We played in the office of Warner Brothers, and they offered us a deal. So it was pretty quick. Having said that, there was a year or so of going up and down the motorway in a van, playing little pubs and stuff, and opening for Brinsley Schwartz, and just also fascinating and lovely memories. But it was those days were over pretty quick.
Yeah, I was fascinated with it though, because I had a similar history with BoDeans. We didn't even have a bass player. We had 2 guitars and a drummer, and we were playing wherever we could. And we got thrown on a showcase, and Capitol Records happened to see it, and then we got in a bidding war between Capitol and Warner Brothers. But it was very quick, and it was very strange for things to happen that quick. I had been a drummer. I barely had even been playing guitar for very long when they signed. So it just...
How old were you?
I was in early 20s,
Because I were 17.
That's crazy.
They're pretty crazy.
I was still in factories then.
Yeah. Dew and I, we did have real jobs for just briefly that summer of '69. We worked at the air base. We worked at the warehouses there, and, drove forklifts and stuff. So it's a vague memory of a real employment.
And then, bam, they released I Need You. Am I correct? They said Horse With No Name was a B-side? Is that correct?
No, it's a little complicated. Horse was the first single. They were leaning towards I Need You. And then they had a strange issue. You have a history in this area, but label would never do this now. The album is done and out. And they then said, do you have anything else? And it was within a few weeks. And because we were young and really keen, we were writing all the time. I said, well, sure, we've always got some new stuff. So we went in and cut these 3 or 4 new songs, of which Horse was one of them. And when they heard that one, they said, oh, well, that's got to be the single. So
that's funny.
It wasn't on the first album. I Need You ended up being the follow-up, because Horse was a big hit and we needed a follow-up. So it all kind of was inside out. But one of the neater things about that was because it was a separate project, it then became a hit. Horse was a hit single in England, sold 250,000 copies. And none of this was released in the States. You know, Warner's UK does not get a guaranteed release worldwide with anything they sign. You know, they sign a lot of local acts. Uh-huh. So with a hit album and a #1 record in England, Burbank said, sure, well, we better put that out here. So they shipped, as you know the term, they shipped the parts, which is the stuff to press the product, to Burbank or wherever it was. And they pressed up 100,000 of the single and the album before they realized that the single wasn't on the album. So those are collectors.
Those are classic stories, though. I mean, I laughed when you said that because I literally heard the same thing from Warner Brothers many times. In fact, when we went out to make even the first record, it was the same thing. We're in pre-production playing songs, and the producer said, "You got anything else?" And I played a song for him that I had sitting there, and he looked at me and said, "That's your first single." So I laughed because I think this is a common thing in the music industry. They look for something like that, or they look for something different or something fresh or something you missed. And
hey, you got anything else?
Yeah. And for you guys, it became just a phenomenon. You know, I mean, Horse was everywhere. And in my intro, that's what I was talking about. It still comes on today everywhere, and everyone knows the lyrics. It's one of those songs that just lasted forever. Did you ever imagine anything like that when you were just messing around?
When you know, the notion of having a hit record is not a complete non-entity. I mean, that's kind of what you strive for. It's like, we're going to be the first time you hear yourself on the radio. Oh my God. And I suppose we will all allow ourselves to think, my gosh, and if stars align, we might have a hit.
Yeah.
Or God forbid, a hit album or whatever. But there's absolutely no way that as a kid or a teenager that you're going to go, and you know what? This could be a century, you know, that we're staring at. So absolutely no way to look that far beyond the horizon. But you know, when you have a success like that at the beginning, it takes a bit of rain to slow the whole thing down. And in our case, there wasn't a lot of rain for quite a while. It was a big string of hits and a very good.
Yeah, it was incredible how many songs you guys constantly had on the radio that everybody knew. And I was wondering, you know, when I think back 60s, 70s, even all into the 80s, it seemed like it was a pinnacle time for music writing and really great recordings and stuff like that. And I talk to people all the time with that kind of feeling, like it was a magical time when you could just sit down and write something, walk into, you know, a recording studio, and the recording studio was a great weeding out process, kind of. Either a song was good and natural and fast, or it wasn't, you know, and it wasn't like you could fix it in a computer or something like that. It had to be something that people liked and they could grasp hold of. Do you feel like the same as that, like 60s and 70s, the songs hold up because of that process?
I do. I think it's a combination of things that you touched on, basically all of them there, because not only was it an incredible, not snapshot, because we're talking about, you know, say mid 60s to mid 70s, incredibly a pinnacle of the creative pop music thing. I always kind of hold in my mind, everybody has their own super group in their head, but I think what Van Dyke and Brian were doing around the Smile time was about as good as it gets in my world. You know, I mean, I was well aware of Burt Bacharach and Jimmy Webb and the other guys that I would consider real masters of my generation. But I think what Brian and Van Dyke were doing at that time, to me, was the pinnacle. I was talking to Cameron Crowe about this the other day because he's working on something about Joni, and there's another incredible genius of our generation, you know, but it was the same era. So, you know, I guarantee whatever kids are right now or 15 or whatever you hear between when you're ages 10 through 15 or 18, that stuff's going to be burned into your soul, whether it's us or you guys. And so it's going to happen now to kids. But I will say that there's just when the hits that we had, things like Horse, it's in Grand Theft Auto.
Yeah.
You know, and it's in a bunch of movies and things. So it comes at you from all different angles.
Yeah. And my kids prefer the older music too. I mean, that's what fascinated me, is they can appreciate the music of now and they listen to it, but they really love the music from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, they think they think it was the pinnacle for writing music too, and recording.
Yeah.
I have to say recording too, because some of the engineers in recording studios were just phenomenal and a great part of the process of putting these songs together too, and creating just the warm sound that we ended up with at the end of the day. So I feel like
when I was talking about all the different parts that go into, yes, it was an incredibly creative time for the actual people writing and singing the stuff, but technically, just if you know the history of that, you know, the move from 4-track to 8-track and these extra little things that kind of lined up. I was going back to the White Album, and the White Album is mostly done at Trident, and the reason they went over to Trident was because it had an 8-track machine, you know, everything else was done 4-track. And believe me, we did 7 albums with George Martin and Jeff Emmerich, so I got stories in that regard. But the point is, for all reasons, that was an incredibly fertile time, lovely time.
Our favorite energy bars are back. Thank you to Be Bold Bars for sponsoring this episode. I talk about this brand all the time because I not only love their delicious energy bars, but I love their story. Stacy Madison, the founder of Be Bold Bars, is also the founder of Stacy's Pita Chips. She is the ultimate snack queen, so if you love pita chips, you will love these bars. They have 4 flavors, and all of them are gluten and dairy-free. Be Bold Bars is offering a special discount for all of you to try their amazing bars. If you use the code BOLD, that's BOLD, at checkout, you will receive 20% off. That code BOLD for 20% off at beboldbars.com. I know you're all going to love them. The other thing I would mention is, here's my story about America. You know, in Wisconsin, we had these long winters, kind of, you know, October to May. It was gray and cold. And at the end of May, going into June, you were still in school, but you started to get these 50-degree days, and the snow would start to melt, and we'd go out and skip some classes and roll down the window and turn the radio on. And songs like Horse would come on the radio, and you'd just turn them up. And I have this wonderful memory of that song, of just being part of that feeling of freedom, of getting back into the summertime. And your music has always felt that way to me. But I also have this image of it being kind of acoustically driven, like you guys just sitting around with acoustics. Was that just natural for you guys? That's just where you were in your headspace?
We had been in bands all through high school. We played in bands together, and they were cover bands. And that was drums and lead singers and guitars, and by that time, fuzz tones and things. So it wasn't just like it was a back step in a sense, you know, when you, and I think that CSN album and James Taylor, and over in the UK, I suppose Cat Stevens would have been an equivalent, you know. Yeah. People sitting on stools with acoustics. Oh, cool. You know, so we ended up like acoustic. And the first album, and Horse, basically is that, just, you know, set up 6 mics, play it, no clicks, no nothing, and very little drums. Dan or I would overdub the bass. And that was basically it. Yeah. You know, and as you know, it worked. So. Yeah. And the less is more kind of treatment, you know, which in a recording studio very often works really well. That's a lovely motto, and as we all know, you can throw, it's like the Trogs tape. It needs strings. I know that. You can sit there and throw stuff at productions and try and get it, but it's nowhere near as easy as it sounds. The less is more. So. Yeah, no, that's very true. But it's like we talked about the weeding out process. When it's working, it's working, and you don't have to question it. And now you've got a new record coming out, Aurora, and I know you've been putting out records all along, but I wanted to talk to you about, you know, your new record today too. And you list quite a few big things that were part of this record, but the bands you cite as an inspiration, like the Beatles and the Bee Gees, Beach Boys, Chicago, bands like that are just incredible influences. And I do hear some of that, especially when I listened to Tears at the end. I thought, this is a Bee Gees song. It's incredible. I wish it was. In fact, there was a brief moment when our manager was managing Barry and Robin, and Morris had passed, and I was such a huge Gibb fan. In fact, Sandman, our song Sandman, actually came from, we used to do Mining Disaster on stage. It was part of our live show. So that A minor strumming thing actually came from
Oh, wow.
finding possession. But anyway, love the Bee Gees, love Barry, all of his work. But by that time, Barry he produced Everybody in the World. And I was really hoping I could maybe get together and have him help me finish it. But I got a very nice note that said, Godspeed, young man. Kind of
Yeah. It's really incredible. Like a lot of records, this one, I think you talk about the pandemic kind of being an inspiration for just going in and nothing else to do. So what do you do? I went through the same thing myself. It's like, what do you do in any almost times of trouble or anything like that? You just turn inward towards what you do is writing songs, recording them.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit? What it was like for you?
Well, I went to Australia, and as we were saying earlier, we have a lovely home in Sydney. And when it was apparent that this was going to be more, every group came home and they said, let's give this a couple of weeks and see how this shakes out. And after a month or so, it was very clear that we weren't talking about a couple of weeks. We'd be lucky a couple of years. So I headed to Sydney, and I've been living in Sydney for 10 years now. But my time there is very often just off. And although I have a guitar there and I strum, and I'm not going to squelch an idea if I have one, I didn't have a studio. So being there, I knew for at least a year, I thought, well, now's the time, the laptop and powered monitors and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And before you knew it, I was up there chipping away at stuff. And, making an album nowadays is not like it used to be in the 70s or 80s, where if you had some success, you're going to do 1 million units or whatever. Now, you really have to assess, what are you doing this for? Who is this for?
Right.
Painters paint. And I guess some of us musicians just write. And that's how it started. Within a year, I had over 40 things. It was a pretty productive time.
That's incredible. Yeah, and I wanted to talk to you. A lot of us are at least fleshing out ideas, if not doing all our records at home now, because you can with the equipment that's out there. It's become a big deal. And I did the same thing in 2020. I went, instead of releasing the new material I went and re-recorded a bunch of old stuff, and I'd put videos up every week for people because I didn't know how else to engage with people other than to do that. So that's what you do. But you couldn't have done that in the 60s and 70s, obviously, like we can today. So what's your, feelings about home recording? Do you like it? Do you not like it as much, or?
I do like it. I played a lot of stuff on our records anyway. Obviously, we came up in an era of overdubbing. It wasn't just like everybody 2, 3, 4, and that's it.
Yeah.
Everybody comes in. So I look back, even on the first album, there's certain songs where I played 3 or 4 things. I was playing the bass, the piano. So that part was not so unusual. But there's so many other parts of the recording process, the camaraderie, the vibe of the studio, certain magic moments between you and an engineer. That's a lot different than sitting in front of a laptop and just kind of going, let me work on that conga part again,
Yeah.
And you do what you can, and I'm sure you're aware of this. We all communicate online, and I've got guys that are great horn players, and I'll send them, here's how I hear the horns. What do you think? And they'll chart them up. And before you know it, I got beautiful real horns and stuff. But it is different than all being in a room together. I don't mind it. I'm an antisocial guy, frankly, and I'm pretty good on my own. But I will say that the process, and I played a lot on this album, but the process is, I know what I'm going to play. I know if I pick up, I can always tell you what the bass note's going to be and when the snare is going to come in. But it's when you bring in those other dudes that you go, oh yeah, I thought of that.
Yeah, that's my problem too. I grew up as a drummer and then picked up other instruments so I could go in and play everything. But I work with TBone Burnett a lot, and he said to me one time, something that made a lot of sense. He goes, when you record everything, it ends up sounding mono because it was just your perspective.
One brain.
So I was just kind of like, oh, well, that's too bad, because I've done like 8 of our records by playing almost everything. So, but he's got a good point. If you can bring all these kind of personalities or energy into stuff, you can really find some good perspective. Or sometimes, like, even if you can get an executive producer to send stuff to, where you can really trust their opinion, like, this is terrible and this is great, stuff you didn't even really think was good. And
that's kind of the Rick Rubin magic thing. He's very openly not a musician, and he just goes by vibe. But I will say, if you go back, pardon me for repeating myself, but go back to when Brian was doing Pet Sounds and the albums leading up to Pet Sounds and stuff, he wasn't playing all those things. In fact, he wasn't even playing the bass. But he was telling everybody the notes. Now that's much different.
Yeah.
If you tell the organ, I want you to play eighths, staccato stuff, that's going to be that guy playing. It's not going to be you playing it. And if you write out a bass part and it's Carol Kay or whoever it is,
yeah,
you might be giving them all the notes, but it's coming together different. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's
how anyone strikes a string or a note or a beat, it can be very unique to their style, their personality, and that can bring a certain sound to all recordings. It's an incredible thing. I'm a solitary guy like you as well, so I mean the idea of being able to record at home is a good thing. I noticed this record's pretty modern sounding too, like you're using a lot of the modern processing and stuff like that. Do you feel like that's important in today's music to kind of stay with the sound that's going on?
No, to be honest. I mean, yes, you're right, and I probably use every trick in the book and stuff. But what I will say is that the things that I try and keep in mind for any kind of, remember the LP stood for long player, any long listening experiences, you're trying to make something other than here's 10 3-minute songs. You're trying to make it. And so some of those are old tricks, sequencing, tempo, that stuff. And a lot of them are new things, all kinds of stuff that my God. I lectured at Loyola for many years, and I would always talk about in the old days of when the TV had 13 channels, the notion of, well, let's see what's on. It wasn't completely crazy to turn on the dial and go, okay, Mannix, we'll watch Mannix. Yeah. But the minute it went to 256 or 1400 or whatever it is, the notion of, well, let's see what's on. Well, it's the same in music production. It used to be, well, here's the 4 sounds on the Rhodes. You can have these 3, vibrato on or off. But now, as you know, there's every instrument's got 9,000 sounds. And so in my mind, I think the constructive thing is you bring it back to what am I after, as opposed to let me hear what my choices are.
Yeah. I wrestle with, a lot of people have a theory in recording that you need to be more like uncomfortable and push yourself in an uncomfortable direction. I've never been one to really do that. And today with the tools you have, you can really be comfortable and get stuff quickly and easily. But I wonder, this is what I wrestle with, is do you need to be uncomfortable to do it? Do you need to push yourself in a different direction to do it? And like on this record, was there any kind of theme you were trying to get to or anything like that? Or were you just trying to get good songs down?
Well, always good songs, but I'm never shy of an instrumental. I had half a dozen instrumentals. I knew I wanted to use something like that. One thing I will say is I don't care if it's Phil Collins or Sting or Michael McDonald, whatever the best singers in the world. I get a little tired of hearing one guy sing 12 songs in a row.
Yeah.
I grew up in the era of the Beatles and the Beach Boys, and the difference between Al Jardine was a different voice than Carl Wilson.
Yeah.
You don't really know that, and unless you're an ultra fan. But when you're doing a solo record, those things come into play. So I'll sometimes have guest singers or guest vocalists say, why don't you sing this verse or something? Just ways to make it a little bit more variety.
Dimensions, yeah. Yeah, that's nice. That's a good idea. Now, you're still touring with America, though, right? You're still doing lots of dates around the country. After, many years, you've probably been touring all along. I know we never, these days we don't go on 10-week tours or anything like that. We go out in spurts around the country and play shows for people wherever we can. What's America's schedule like this summer? Where are you guys going to be?
Well, for 52 years, believe it or not, other than COVID, we were doing about 100 shows a year. And that was all over the world. 100 shows, as you well know, is probably about 200 days of travel, double it.
Yeah.
And now our life, like many groups, is mostly weekends. You'll fly on a Thursday, play Friday, Saturday, come home Sunday, or sometimes there's 3. Yeah. I actually leave tomorrow for a 10-day run, 11 days, and it's my longest run of the summer.
Yeah.
But we did make a conscious effort to cut it back some. Dewey and I are both going to be 70 this year, and just physically,
it's tough. Yeah, I'm not sure people know how tough. It is tough. I do the same thing. I tell my agent, look, I'll go out for kind of 10, 11 days at the max because it's additive. Each day you're out there, you kind of get a little more tired. So by the end of that run, you're pretty exhausted. If what that means is that the phone has been ringing and people have been trying to get you and book you, I mean, I understand how fortunate we all are, but I also don't want to go there and just deliver 90 minutes of crap or something. You really want to
doing. So you got to keep an eye. So we're cutting it back, and trying to keep it at a manageable, something we can physically do, something that we're proud of, you know.
It sounds great. The last question I want to ask you is just generally your feelings on where the music business is. I talk to a lot of people who, like, we came from an era of where music was really a big part of people's lives, and you were, you know, some rock bands were like gods in this world, and it was a big deal. You had posters on the wall and stuff, and it's changed a lot through all these years for us. And I've, you know, been through quite a lot. I was recording on tape and before CDs and stuff like that, and cassettes, and how it's gone now to streaming and stuff, and then the revenue streams that have changed throughout the years. Like, in general, like, what's your feeling about the music business today and where we're at?
I think, well, first of all, it's not quite a business like it used to be. You know, not that the major labels ran the show, but the era that we grew up in, obviously much different. I truly think, and some people think I'm kind of making a joke about this, but I think that era of selling vinyl, you know, double platinum, and this one's gone 5. I think that will, in the overall arc of entertainment, will be viewed like the Catskills or vaudeville or something. I think it'll be this tiny little snapshot. Happens to be our entire life in our world. Yeah. But when you look at it in the basis of a century or something, you know, I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's a wonderful thing, but it has morphed so much. I used to, when I was talking to kids at Loyola, I would say, you know, you all get to redefine what this business is becoming. It was kind of, I was trying to put a good spin on what was obviously a pretty precarious scenario. Not really sure where it's going at the moment. I do think this whole notion of, you know, nine writers per song, you know, and stuff is and, you know, and 12 producers on 12 tracks. I don't think that's great. You know, I love the idea of a signature by a particular composer or something, but out of my hand. You know?
Yeah. And I'm not a good musical historian going, you know, way back, but there's a part of me that hopes it's cyclical, that, you know, there've been other times in history when music was really great and at a pinnacle place with the way it was being made and who was making it. And then, you know, that was our 60s and 70s and 80s too. But there's a part of me that's always hoping it's going to come back to a place where people make it more their thing instead of the corporate world making it their thing, and sure. Hopeful that
well, let's
way.
Hope you're right.
Yeah, I hope so too. Anyways, I want to thank you for joining me today for the podcast. Everybody go check out the new record, Aurora, from Gerry Beckley. I thank you so much. I've listened to your music forever, and it's really been a pleasure to finally be able to talk to you, so thank you.
Nice to talk with you too, man. Good luck.
Yeah, safe travels.
See you, man. Bye.
Okay, that was Gerry Beckley from America, legendary rock singer-songwriter. Big part of my life. It was sure a pleasure talking to him. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Pass the podcast along to your friends and family. Subscribe, rate, review everywhere you get your podcast, because otherwise I'm just talking to myself. I'm Kurt Newman, and we're staring at the world.
Thanks for listening to Staring at the World with BoDeans, Kurt Newman, a podcast about creative innovation. Please be sure to download, subscribe, rate, and review, and keep listening wherever you get your podcasts.